I want you to picture something entirely different. Not a blast on the battlefield, not a missile slicing through the midnight sky. Imagine silence, the kind that falls over an artillery battery that has discharged its final shell and finds nothing more to fire. Imagine the quiet inside an F-35 cockpit when the fuel gauge rests empty, and resupply that was due yesterday, and the day before, and the day before that, has yet to arrive. Picture 120,000 soldiers arrayed across 5 operational sectors, entrenched, rations exhausted this morning, waiting for orders that cannot be executed because fuel for the vehicles does not exist, because ammunition to sustain any advance has never arrived, because the command infrastructure coordinating the operation was obliterated 3 days prior. I have spent 30 years studying how armies perish, not in the cinematic sense, not in the last heroic stand, not at a climactic battle remembered in history books, but in the quiet, relentless collapse that occurs when a modern military supply network is severed at every critical point simultaneously, leaving the organization to consume itself from within. In 4 decades of military analysis, I've never observed a supply interdiction executed with the speed, precision, and strategic depth that Iran has just displayed against the IDF. What transpired over 5 days was not conventional warfare. It was the methodical demolition of an army's capacity to operate, conducted not with brute force but with surgical precision, completed in a time frame that no Western model had deemed operationally achievable. 5 days. From the first strike on Israel's principal logistics hubs to the operational paralysis of 120,000 deployed soldiers across all active fronts. 5 days from the initial impact on the Ashdod port fuel terminal to the internal IDF assessment acknowledging that sustained offensive operations were no longer feasible at current supply levels. 5 days from the most ambitious logistics interdiction campaign in modern warfare history to the unraveling of the military architecture that the United States and Israel had spent 50 years and hundreds of billions of dollars constructing. The world is still absorbing what occurred. Washington continues to run assessments, still tallying damage estimates, still attempting to craft a coherent response to a strategic scenario that defied every planning assumption. Meanwhile, reality on the ground does not pause for bureaucratic calculations. 120,000 Israeli soldiers remain in positions they cannot advance from, cannot be resupplied to, and cannot retreat from without facing the same interdiction that cut off their supply lines in the first place. This is not a tactical inconvenience. It is a strategic judgment. Understanding precisely how Iran executed this verdict, through which weapons, under what operational logic, and toward which strategic objectives, is the purpose of this analysis. Over the next 40 minutes, we will address the questions that matter. How did Iran locate, target, and neutralize 90% of IDF supply routes in a single coordinated operational campaign? What does the sequence of this campaign reveal about the depth of Iranian strategic planning? What does it practically mean for 120,000 soldiers when their supply chain collapses? The calculations of fuel, the arithmetic of ammunition, the timeline for food, and at which point does logistical failure translate into operational incapacity that no tactical skill can remedy? Why was the United States unable to execute the emergency resupply Israel desperately needed? And what does that failure reveal about the genuine limits of American power projection in a contested supply environment? When an army of 120,000 is starved into paralysis in 5 days, who then holds the initiative, and what does the Middle East look like on the other side of this collapse? Iran's campaign was not ad hoc. It reflected years of meticulous intelligence gathering, target development, and operational planning, executed across 5 distinct phases, each designed to dismantle a specific layer of the IDF logistics system. The sequencing was deliberate, ensuring that the destruction of one layer prevented any surviving layers from compensating. To grasp why this operation succeeded, one must first understand the complexity of a modern army's supply chain. The popular image of military logistics as trucks delivering ammunition barely scratches the surface, much like describing a jet fighter merely as a flying gun. The IDF supply network is an intricate, interdependent system, built with multiple nodes, pathways, and redundancies to withstand disruption at individual points. Iranian planners had mapped this system in detail, recognized where redundancies existed, and, most crucially, realized that simultaneous strikes across all redundant pathways would entirely nullify the system's resilience. Phase 1. Maritime interdiction. The campaign commenced at 2:40 a.m. on day 1 with coordinated assaults on Israel's 3 operational ports. Ashdod, handling approximately 55% of IDF military imports, absorbed 34 precision strikes over 28 minutes. The attacks were surgical, targeting container cranes dedicated to military cargo, the fuel offloading pier to achieve complete structural collapse rather than reparable damage, and the bonded military warehouses with warheads designed to detonate stored munitions internally. Keffa, the northern port supplying the northern front, endured 41 strikes focusing on the military fuel terminal and the rail connection to forward logistics bases. The Red Sea port, Israel's only non-Mediterranean import route, was hit by 18 strikes, destroying container handling infrastructure and severing the connecting roads and railways. Within 6 hours, 90% of Israel's maritime import capacity was rendered inoperable. The IDF depends on continuous maritime resupply to replenish consumables, fuel, ammunition, food, spare parts, all of which deplete at rates no domestic stockpile can sustain indefinitely. By sunrise on day 1, the primary replenishment pathway was effectively eliminated. Phase 2, road and rail interdiction. Between hour 6 and 18, Iran shifted focus to overland logistics, linking remaining stockpiles to forward-deployed units. 12 major road bridge crossings along central supply corridors to northern and southern fronts were struck, each collapsing structurally at the bridge deck level, necessitating complete reconstruction. Northern rail lines were targeted at 9 points, each strike maximizing unusable track length. This phase demonstrated exceptional operational sophistication. Instead of targeting moving vehicles, a costly temporary disruption, Iran attacked the infrastructure itself. A destroyed bridge cannot be bypassed when every alternate crossing along every route has also been neutralized. Through these measures, the IDF's overland logistics capacity was systematically paralyzed. By the end of the overland interdiction phase, the critical road and rail networks were effectively destroyed, leaving the IDF's supply system structurally incapacitated. The next stage, forward depot destruction, unfolded between hour 18 and 36, following the severing of maritime and overland resupply routes. This phase specifically targeted the forward logistics depots, the essential stockpiles maintained in theater to sustain combat operations without immediate resupply. These depots are fortified, widely dispersed, and their locations among the most classified operational secrets within the IDF. That Iranian targeting databases contained precise coordinates for most of these facilities represents a major intelligence achievement, with implications far beyond the immediate battlefield. 11 of Israel's 14 identified forward depots were struck during this phase. The 3 that remained intact were situated in urban areas where concerns over collateral damage limited the extent of strikes, a constraint that Iranian planners appear to have deliberately factored into their operational calculus. The surviving stockpiles were estimated at roughly 15% of pre-campaign levels, offering between 3 and 7 days of supply at current consumption rates for the forces dependent upon them. Phase 4, air logistics interdiction, ran between hour 36 and 48. This stage aimed at the emergency aerial resupply options identified by American and Israeli planners as the primary compensatory mechanism following the maritime and overland disruptions. Ben Gurion International Airport, serving as the main gateway for air-delivered military cargo, was struck at 6 points with penetrating warheads engineered to crater the runway in a way that resisted rapid repair. Simultaneously, Roni Airport in the south, the secondary aerial logistics hub, was targeted. The major military airfields at Nevatim and Telnof, capable of handling heavy cargo aircraft, had already been disabled in previous strikes on IDF bases. By the conclusion of this phase, Israel lacked any operational air cargo terminal able to accommodate the heavy lift aircraft necessary for emergency resupply. The air bridge that Washington would have relied upon simply did not exist. Phase 5 extended from day 2 through day 5, representing a continuous campaign rather than a discrete operational action. This phase systematically targeted any attempts to repair damaged infrastructure, emergency improvisations and logistics, or emerging alternative supply routes. When Israeli engineering units tried to repair 2 destroyed road bridges, follow-up strikes eliminated both the repair equipment and the partially reconstructed structures. Commercial vessels attempting to deliver emergency supplies to Ashdod through ad hoc arrangements were thwarted by naval interdiction forces, demonstrating the futility of any improvised resupply. The message was unequivocal. The interdiction campaign was not a single event, but a sustained operational reality, enforced until the strategic objectives were achieved. What is particularly striking in analyzing the post-interdiction situation is less the dramatic visuals of empty ammunition containers or grounded aircraft, and more the cold arithmetic of consumption versus remaining stock across 120,000 deployed troops in active combat. The numbers tell a story harsher than any battlefield narrative. A single IDF armored brigade consumes approximately 180,000 liters of diesel fuel daily across all its vehicles, including tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery tractors, engineering assets, and logistical trucks. With roughly 8 armored brigades deployed in operational formations, the remaining fuel inventory after Phase 1 and 3 strikes, estimated at 40% of pre-campaign levels, sustained operations for only 4 to 6 days. By the 5th day of the interdiction, fuel reserves fell below the minimum needed to continue offensive maneuvers, immobilizing armored vehicles not due to enemy fire but empty tanks. Aviation fuel constraints proved even more acute. IDF air operations consume roughly 2.4 million liters of aviation fuel per day at current sortie rates. Following the destruction of ports and depots, remaining aviation fuel reserves were projected to last around 8 days. By day 5, sortie rates had been reduced by over 60% due to implemented conservation measures. F-35 aircraft, Israel's premier strike platforms relied upon for deep strike missions central to its operational doctrine, were flying at a fraction of their normal tempo, with each mission rationed against a dwindling fuel supply counting down toward zero. Ammunition consumption under sustained combat is massive, often underestimated during peacetime planning. A single IDF artillery battalion, firing at standard sustained rates, expends roughly 800 rounds daily. Multiplied across all artillery systems deployed on 5 active fronts combined with tank main gun rounds, mortars, anti-tank missiles, and the precision-guided munitions essential to modern combat, total daily ammunition use reaches thousands of tons. After Phase 3, surviving forward depots contained approximately 5 days' worth of supplies at reduced operational tempo. By the 5th day, multiple artillery units reported exhaustion of available munitions and cessation of firing missions. Food logistics add an even more immediate human dimension to the collapse. Feeding 120,000 personnel requires about 360 tons of rations daily. While this might appear manageable in isolation, the destruction of distribution infrastructure made resupply impossible, forcing forward units to rely solely on what they carried. IDF doctrine prescribes a 3-day ration stock for forward units. By day 4, units at the most advanced positions had already consumed emergency rations, reserved for true last resort scenarios. By day 5, operational reports across multiple sectors included terminology that no military commander wants to write. Combat effectiveness had begun to degrade due to nutritional insufficiency. Medical logistics compounded the crisis. Field surgical teams, trauma care facilities, and casualty evacuation systems all depend on continuous replenishment of consumable medical supplies, blood products, surgical instruments, and pharmaceuticals, all of which have minimal organic carrying capacity. By day 3, several field medical facilities were already operating at reduced capacity due to supply shortages. By day 5, the limits of medical logistics directly influenced operational decisions, as commanders had to factor in the capacity for casualty treatment when determining which operations could continue. It is essential to be frank about an aspect largely avoided in American media coverage. The United States was unable to carry out the emergency resupply Israel required. This failure was structural, not political. It is not a question of Washington lacking will. It is a reflection of the physical and operational limits of American military logistics when the receiving infrastructure has been systematically neutralized. Emergency resupply planning initiated in Washington within hours of the first strikes confronted 3 sequential compounding challenges that created an insurmountable operational barrier. The first problem was throughput capacity. Heavy-lift American aircraft, C-17s and C-5s, each carry approximately 70 to 80 tons per flight. Israel's aviation fuel requirement alone, 2.4 million liters daily, equates to roughly 2,000 tons of fuel that must be delivered each day just to maintain even the reduced sortie tempo, assuming 75 tons per flight. That calculation accounts solely for fuel, without yet considering the additional daily requirements for ammunition, rations, medical supplies, and spare parts. The United States Air Force operates a total fleet of approximately 220 C-17 aircraft, but not all are available for a single mission. The volume of airlift required to offset the loss of maritime logistics surpasses the physical capacity of the available heavy-lift fleet. Beyond that, the infrastructure for receiving supplies presents its own insurmountable challenges. Ben Gurion's runway network was neutralized during Phase 4, eliminating the primary entry point for air-delivered cargo. Rayoni Airport, intended as the secondary facility, was likewise rendered non-functional. Military airfields capable of handling significant cargo had already been destroyed in previous base strikes. While American engineers can repair cratered runways, doing so under the time-sensitive pressure of an acute supply crisis, and while repair crews and equipment remain under threat of follow-on strikes, is effectively impossible. A third complication stems from the threat environment itself. Large, slow, and radar-visible, American C-17s cannot safely operate without permissive airspace. The same Iranian air defense and strike assets that carried out the interdiction campaign have shown both the capability and intent to engage targets throughout the operational theater. Flying heavy-lift aircraft into a contested environment without fighter cover is unfeasible. Deploying fighter cover requires operational air bases, which the campaign has already neutralized. The result is a circular dependency with no rapid resolution. Having studied American military logistics extensively, what stands out most is how thoroughly this scenario invalidates the assumptions underpinning contingency planning for Israeli resupply. Those assumptions relied on functional ports, operational airfields, and a threat environment that air power could suppress sufficiently to permit logistics operations. Each of these three assumptions was invalidated by the Iranian campaign before American planners could move from assessment to execution. The Pentagon's silence was not a reflection of a lack of will, but of an absence of viable operational solutions to a logistics interdiction strategy specifically designed to defeat American resupply capabilities. Analyzing the human dimension of military collapse requires precision. Armies do not fracture simply because supplies run out. They break when the belief in eventual resupply disappears. Empty ammunition crates and dry fuel tanks are severe yet survivable conditions if soldiers believe that resupply is imminent and that their endurance serves a meaningful purpose. When that belief vanishes, when soldiers understand that supply chains are severed at every node, that ports are destroyed, roads impassable, airfields cratered, and no external assistance can penetrate, the organizational cohesion sustaining military performance begins to dissolve. The contrast between the psychological state of Iranian forces conducting the campaign and Israeli forces absorbing it reveals a fundamental asymmetry extending beyond weapon systems. Iranian operational planners acted from a position of strategic initiative. They controlled the timing, selected targets, sequenced actions, and maintained operational coherence across a complex 5-phase campaign lasting 5 days, without suffering the command disruptions that might compromise a less disciplined organization. Soldiers and officers executing each phase demonstrated focused professionalism, fully aware of their objectives and the significance of their actions. Iranian military culture embodies a form of institutional resilience forged over decades, surviving 50 years of sanctions, targeted assassinations of senior commanders, industrial sabotage, and continuous military threats has not demoralized the institution. Instead, it has fostered a deeply ingrained conviction that external pressures, regardless of severity, are problems to solve rather than conditions to accept. This conviction translates operationally into the capacity to carry out complex, sustained, high-risk operations against heavily defended targets. It underpins the human foundation of the military capability that has systematically dismantled the IDF supply chain. Iran's self-reliance contrasts sharply with Israel's dependency on American resupply, a dependency that has never been more operationally consequential. Iran planned and executed the campaign autonomously, requiring no American permission, no congressional approval, no export license, and no allied political consensus. The campaign relied solely on domestically developed or externally acquired weapons, internally cultivated targeting databases, and operational doctrines conceived by Iranian planners.